the second McKay virtual Fireside Chat series with community leaders. Each virtual Fireside Chat is one-on-one interviews taped on Zoom, available on demand on Mr. McKay's YouTube pages, social media, and newsletters. Our guest today is Wisdom Tettey, Principal of University of Toronto Scarborough campus. Hello, Mr. Tettey. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Now over to you, Mr. McKay.
Thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Wisdom, for joining us. You'll be interested to know that today is June the 2nd, and 23 years ago today, I was elected for the first time to the Parliament of Canada. So I don't know how I ended up surviving 23 years, but in the process of surviving 23 years, I've had the great pleasure and honor of meeting a number of the principals at UTSC, starting with my old friend Paul Thompson, who he and I went to we went to UTSC together. He was at one end of the bell curve, and I was at the other end of the bell curve. My theory is that somebody had to hold up my end of the bell curve, and I thought I did a good job. And of course, your immediate predecessor was Paul Kidd, who Bruce Kidd, yeah. There might be a Paul Kidd out there somewhere. Bruce Kidd, who was an Olympic runner. And I had illusions that I was a runner as well, which were quickly dissipated once I got into any kind of races. But Paul was Bruce was, once I make a mistake, I like to stay with it. Bruce was a really, really excellent principal at UTSC and an outstanding Olympian and just an all-round decent human being. So you have a number of very worthy predecessors, Wisdom. But I thought it was interesting, you were born in Ghana and your parents named you Wisdom. And you have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate. You are a professor. You are a principal. You are a doctor. You are a vice president. How did your parents know at that time that they were going to have such a smart and wise child?
You're probably giving them a lot of credit for being able to look into the future, right? I thought you were going to sympathize with me and go, how come they put this pressure on a young kid like you? Yeah. But no, I just want to start off by acknowledging the work of my predecessors. Both Paul and Bruce are colleagues that I've had a chance to connect with, and they've been solid supporters of UTSC and continue to be. And certainly that is the foundations that they've built that the rest of us are, trying to move forward on. So I think it's always important to look back at those who've laid the foundations for us and have done an excellent job of positioning this institution. But at the personal level, yes, I grew up in Ghana, had either the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, bearing this name, which meant that, there's no shortage of people who, remind you of what you're expected to do. Yeah. But, it's been a blessing for me to be able to do what I've done. But, it's important, when we talk about individual accomplishments, to remember that we don't do this alone, right? I mean, I come from a family that was really supportive. I had a mother that ensured that in spite of the fact that she didn't have a formal education, that she invested in us to make sure that we had an opportunity to be able to, explore what was out there, right? And education was a solid foundation that allowed you to some extent, equalize the playing field in a way. And as I went through university, through primary school, through high school to university, my teachers have been strong pillars for me. Building a sense of confidence in you, helping you along the way. Peers have been there. So there are a lot of people, and I come from a very extended family as well. So just the range of people who are out there to support you and to have you believe in yourself, and to ground you in some core values that have endured, right? That allow you to keep to the path to where I've been. And so, it's a combination of support, people believing in you and giving you an opportunity, you doing your part to ensure that those who who believe in you are made to feel that it was worth their while to do that. And so I come to this position with a lot of humility, understanding that it is not a singular achievement on my part, but that of a lot of people.
But you have a extremely interesting path to come to this position that you're in now, including doing some studies, I believe, in Moscow, at least in Russia. Mm-hmm. Tell me, how do you go from Ghana to Russia? That's not a that's not a usual path, or maybe at that time actually it was a usual path, because the Soviets were keen on getting African students. I believe right. That's correct.
Well, I mean, I think that it goes back to the post, independence period, the mm-hmm. post-colonial period, where there was a lot of support for different independent movements from the East, and so that history has always been there. But by the time I went to Moscow, that history, that relationship was not as strong as it was in that early period. But nevertheless, continued to be part of the broader diplomatic relationship that Ghana had with the East. But from my perspective, it's interesting because we study a lot about the West. We were products of the British colonial system, so we're a Commonwealth country, and tend to veer in the direction of the West, right? And so you heard a lot about the West, and you heard quite a bit about the East. And for me, it was interesting with my interest in political science to say, how about you find out yourself, right? Because I know enough about politics to know that propaganda can be part of what you're, suffused.
Propaganda never happens in this country. No.
And so an opportunity to find out yourself, and to understand the culture, to understand the language, so that it's not filtered. And so I've had an interest in politics of different systems. My area is political, comparative politics, and so understanding different political systems is important. And so going to Moscow, was a year abroad, term for me, and spend time there, learn the language, engage with the communities, and was able to get a better understanding. The timing for me was interesting because it was just around the time that, the Soviet Union was going through perestroika, change was happening at the time.
Really? Oh.
And so it was exciting to see elements of the old and the new that was just about to be born, right? So that was a very unique time to go on, that term abroad program.
That's a political scientist's dream, to be at the breakup of the Soviet Union, the perestroika, they turn towards the West, and then essentially the dissolution of the Russian Empire, and then the reemergence of the Russian Empire under Putin, or the attempted reemergence. So do you still speak Russian?
It's gone pretty rusty, but I'm able to get by, and I surprise people once in a while when I can understand what they're saying, or I say something back to them. But I wouldn't venture with the same level of confidence that I had about 30 years ago, where I could reasonably get by, in Moscow and anywhere else, being able to communicate effectively. Yeah, but there's still, remnants of that. And that's the thing about language, right? That, you just need certain things that trigger it, and you're amazed yourself about what you can remember. But
has it been any use to you in your academic career?
It has. I think it's important to remember the language is part of a culture, right? And so when you're studying language, it's not just the syntax and morphology or whatever that you're doing. You're understanding the whole culture as well. And so that has served me well in terms of my understanding of different cultures. As a political communications person, being able to engage interculturally requires you to have some understanding of what different things mean, from things like nonverbal cues to verbal, right? So it's not just because we tend to talk about language as though it was, disconnected from the broader culture. But language is a way into a culture, and that's the way that I see it. So it's allowed me to have a good understanding of not just Russia, but the Soviet, nations of the time and their post-breakup versions as well.
Right. I know I initially talked to you, when I talked to you, we talked about why a student graduating from Laurier Collegiate or Woburn Collegiate this year, I'm just picking those as two high schools in the riding, should pick UTSC, particularly in this time of COVID and the reality that a lot of classes will be virtual classes, will be taught online.
Mm-hmm.
But before I go to that, I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your views with respect to what's been happening in our community in the United States for the last week. I heard you give a talk at a Black History Month. I think it was last February. I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I noted to myself at the time that was one of the most thoughtful, may I say, wise.
You're just going to resist that, right, John?
Yeah. We're going to go there regardless. May I say wise conversation and presentation that I had heard a long time. So, not that I wanted you to do the Coles Notes version of that presentation, but I would think that today, this past week's events have caused you to reflect further, and I'd be interested in those reflections.
Yeah, no, thanks for that opportunity. I mean, I think, and I've shared this with colleagues on our campus, there are a lot of people going through anguish about what is going on. And I think it's easy to assume that because it's physically removed from here, that people are not touched by it. And, a lot of people within our community are feeling it because there's a sense of affinity. Those are things that people do experience here as well. And I think it's important that as Canadians, that we don't fall into this false sense of complacency that it is not here, it's there, right? I mean, it's taken a particular form in the US, but nevertheless, people experience it. And within our city as well, this has been a long-standing issue, right? So I think the issue of anti-Black racism is one that a lot of us live every day. I personally was touched by this event because I could just hear the very things within my own small circle resonating in those spaces. And people that I talked to here, I know felt very strongly, both psychologically and emotionally about what is going on. But there's also a lot of fear and anger because this is the life that a lot of young Black men in particular, but it extends beyond, young Black men, that as a society, we feel we live in constant fear of what is to come because of a lack of trust that we'll be treated, as humans, as the equal of others. So it's a personal thing for me, and it's one that I think resonates across our society. But it's one thing to talk about the emotional piece. I think that we have to collectively turn our minds to how do we address this so people don't have to live this on a recurring basis, right? And so that requires us to think introspectively about what are the kinds of things that enable these conditions to persist, right? And how do we collectively, and this is not a responsibility of just Black compatriots, I think this is a collective responsibility on our part as a nation. And as a nation, I think that when you mature, you have to be able to say, we don't have these things. You can't be a mature democracy. You can't be a mature civilization when these things that go against the very essence of who we are as represented in our charter continue to be part of our everyday existence, right? So it's very personal for me, and I think it should be a wake-up call. We say this and it ebbs, but I think that we can seize the moment and do something that allows our country to in fact be higher up on that hierarchy of civilizations, if that is what we profess to be.
Thoughtful as always. We've heard the phrase "wake up call" for forever. Like as long as I've been in politics for 23 years, we've had so many wake up calls. We're missing the alarm at this point. And yet nothing. Well, I say a little bit aggressively. Nothing seems to change, or maybe there are changes that have happened or are happening, and that there is some progress. I don't know where, if there is. I'd be interested in knowing where it is. So, you represent a major educational institution. I represent the federal government. Two very, very significant institutions in our society. So if we magically took me out of this picture and substitute by Zoom technology the Prime Minister of Canada, what would you say to him?
Well, I think, the Prime Minister today acknowledged the fact that, there's anti-Black racism in Canada. And I think acknowledgement is a good start. Because before you can get to the point of making change, you've got to acknowledge that there's a problem, right? And there's still a lot of people in our society who play the proverbial ostrich on this one, right? And don't acknowledge it. So I think that is a good step. But that also requires then that we open up the full reality of our story. And our story has not always been what is we see in the sanitized versions, right? I mean, certainly Canada has played its part in fostering, human rights and so on. But we also have the ugly side of our history, and we need to put that out and make it bare. And so once you have that start, then you begin to engage with how do you then address it, right? Because to get to the step of addressing, you've got to acknowledge it. And then that opens up the question about moving beyond what are, in most cases, kind of episodic. It happens and we do something in the moment, to something that is much more structural and enduring. And so that means that we have to look at what our structures are. How do they embed inequality and begin to, take care of those, right? Address those questions. From things around, healthcare to education and so on. We say it's available to everyone, but it really is not, right? There are impediments about those. What we study, the curriculum, is reflective of a particular view of the world. Those are things that we can, change as educational institutions. And some of that conversation, I think, in the spirit of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work, we're beginning to see that on the Indigenous front, but it's also, slow, not as fast as we would. But I think it's the same kind of mechanism of understanding and beginning to address structural problems. Now, I think that, even the language that we use about, minorities sometimes embeds that problem, because so we talk about these are equity-seeking communities. And my position on this is that when you talk about people seeking equity, it looks like, they're looking for something and somebody has to give it to them, right? So you're depending on other people being generous enough to allow minority communities to be part of the larger society. And I think that if we move from there to something that we pride ourselves with, that we're a rights-based society, and talk about these, members of our community as deserving of equity, of deserving of the rights that we have in the charter, then that puts an onus on all of us, right? Because then it changes the conversation from the largesse of someone helping someone out to saying you are obligated as a citizen to ensure that your fellow citizen is treated with the kind of rights-based assets, right, that are available to the society. So I think those are part of the conversation that we need to have and begin to remove some of those impediments. But unless we do those, they'll always be superficial. People will play around it because it's not anchored in a commitment to what is right-based. So we need to do that, and our educational system is going to be a huge part of that, group of institutions that make a contribution. Because I think how we learn or unlearn some of these things is going to be a critical part of that movement towards a better place for us in our society.
I like the thought of citizens' rights, and my citizens' rights are in direct relation to your citizens' rights, and your
Mm-hmm.
citizens' rights are in direct relation to mine. So that if your rights are being impaired, so also are my rights being impaired. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that how should we say, the resistant population necessarily appreciates that when for want of a better term, equity-seeking groups come, that their securing of citizens' rights are in fact to the benefit of the entire society.
Exactly. I'm
Yeah.
glad you raised that point, because a lot of the benefits that we all have come from the struggle of civil rights movements, right? And unfortunately, some of the people who were at the forefront of those struggles have not necessarily been beneficiaries, but others have. And I think that if you look at the history in the United States and in Canada, a lot of times you see Black people at the forefront of those struggles because they've been among the most marginalized. And yet others have benefited from that struggle. So I think looking at this in terms of, so I consciously tend to shy away from using equity seeking for that reason, because it's got an inbuilt
Right.
connotation there that I'm not comfortable with. And I think going back to your point, John, if we talk about these as equity deserving, just as I deserve my right as a citizen, you deserve your right as a citizen, you treat it that way and say, if we are all citizens deserving of particular rights, then why are we treating each other differently, right? Because then it goes against the very essence of what a right-based society should be. And I think that language is important, because language carries with it a whole lot of meaning. And if we continue to do that, and that is why in Canada, people have, there's a sense in which our Indigenous compatriots are seen as, or depending on the state, but the notion of seeking, it looks like you're always depending on someone. The same thing with our Black communities and marginalized communities. But these are not, these are some of the most hardworking people you can find. I think it became evident to everyone in the midst of COVID-19 by the fact that those that we continue to think of as the marginalized, the less important in our society, have in fact been the ones who prop us up, right? They are, in fact, the essential backbones for our societies. So do they deserve the rights to be treated equally, fairly? Those are the questions that we have to confront as a society.
Yeah. I feel like I've kind of sideswiped you a bit on this conversation, but I felt that it's a necessary conversation. So I'm going to switch to what I initially talked to you about talking about, and we'll go back to the proverbial student at Laurier Collegiate, naturally brighter than bright can possibly be, knows that UTSC is the best university within miles and miles and miles, and is talking to mommy and daddy about writing the check for first year, whatever that's in. Sell that proverbial Laurier student or Woburn or Cedarburg, or pick your high school. Sell that student on why UTSC, pick UTSC in the first place, and B, the student experience that you and I would understand is not going to be the student experience that this person is going to have, possibly not just this first term, but possibly for several terms to come.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this. I think, a starting point is that by long shot, this UTSC is part of Canada's top university. One of the best universities in the world, without question. And so you have an opportunity to be on a campus of the University of Toronto. That in itself is something to be proud of. On our campus in particular, in fact, we just finished a strategic planning exercise, and our plan is called Inspiring Inclusive Excellence. And, the key thing there is to bring together into this space people from around the world, the best talent from around the world, to engage with one another and to build this vibrant community of learners who are able to shape the world in fundamental ways. But we also want them to become leaders with a conscience, leaders who are able to constructively disrupt some of the stuff that we just talked about and create a world that is better for everyone. If you are that kind of person who want to embody inclusive excellence, where you want to be among the best talents in the world, but at the same time not lose sight of the fact that you have a responsibility to community, then this is a place for you. Because we look at our society as one that is building leaders. UTSC is one that is looking at creating leaders who have a conscience and a heart, is the way I look at it. And so, you come to us with the talent that you've got. We recognize that talent comes in different forms, and so we embrace all of it. We recognize that people with different experiences and different aspirations can come into this space and make us all better, because we are better than each of us as individuals. And so we pride ourselves with that we are a campus that is a vibrant intellectual community, a campus that continues to work at making ourselves more inclusive and welcoming for everyone, and one that brings the world to us. Because these students are going to be leaders, not just in our local communities, but leaders in the world. And so how does our community create the environment for them to engage the world and to learn from the world and to shape the world in ways that are, taking place in a very convivial, a very, what would you call, intimate, dynamic environment. So we are a very, exciting group of people who want to shape the world, change the world, build leaders. And I entreat everyone who wants to be part of that, to choose our campus, because you would, in fact, have the opportunity when you're on our campus, not just to benefit from what UTSC offers, but to be part of a tri-campus university system that opens up a whole lot of possibilities for you.
Am I to understand that in the past few years, the top undergraduate scholar in the entire tri-campus system came from UTSC? Is that correct?
Yeah, so over the last decade, a significant number, and I'm, hazard a guess, certainly I know it's certainly more than 50% of the time. I think probably 7 out of 10 years, the best, and this award goes to the best student across the 3 campuses, right? And so we take pride in the fact that the best and brightest are right here in Scarborough. And the thing is that they're not just people who are beholden to their books. These are people who understand what it means to be a citizen. And that is what I'm most proud of, right? That we are creating an environment that cultivates leaders who are able to make an impact beyond their parochial, desire to just be a smart, student, right? These are smart students who are able to bring the benefit of their smartness to the world beyond them.
Well, some of us have known for years that Scarborough is the center of the universe.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there we are. So like, why wouldn't we have the top scholar in the entire tri-campus? It's perfectly normal and to be expected. So, and is there any particular reason why, for 6, 7 of the last 10 years, the top scholar has come out of UTSC?
I don't think there's a magic answer to that. I think it just reflects the kind of students that we have on our campus, and we have a lot of stellar students across our 3 campuses. And I think that we do create an environment where there's a certain degree of intimate relationship amongst faculty and students, because we're relatively small campus, and so students are able to get the kind of hands-on interaction with faculty that some institutions may not have. We also have a very strong student services, unit that ensures that students' well-being, their experiences outside of the classroom, are of the highest caliber, right? And so you're looking at the environment that cultivates that kind of students. You have to make sure that student well-being is fundamental to the educational experience. You want to make sure that students feel supported. And we have a number of services that focus on the student, and I always take pride in the fact that all my colleagues understand that at the heart of what we do are our students. And so we all commit to making sure that that student, the totality of the student is taken care of, right? It's not just a student in the classroom. Is that student outside of the classroom? Is that student and their sense of community? Is that student knowing that they can call on someone and that person will respond to their needs and so on, and make sure that they're there to guide them. So we have various opportunities for students. We are touted as the co-op campus of the University of Toronto because experiential learning is an important part of that, and that is another strength that this campus has had. I think from its formation, its beginnings, it's always been at the forefront of innovation. You, John, would understand some of the early focus of this campus in terms of innovation and technology and so on. So some of the things that are happening today, this campus was at the forefront of. So we take all of this into account. So we hope that all of this coming together, leads to the kind of student who stands tall above most, right? And so it happens that the things that we do allows this brilliant student that we have in the first place to rise to the top above others.
So you've answered. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I said that would be my, sense of what it is that cultivates that kind of student, right? It is not to say somehow we've got a magic bullet that gives us the top students. I think it's the hard work of the staff, the faculty, and the students themselves, and the commitment that people give to the success of our students. And
the principal had nothing to do with it at all.
No, they make me look good. They do the work. I think, my gratitude to my colleagues and their commitment is just beyond compare, right? And our students understand that, and they do their part. Everyone does their part. And we've got a stellar group of faculty and staff who understand what it means to be an educator, and they invest all their soul and their blood into that.
Now, you've answered half the question. The other half of the question is, I suspect that you might have done that pitch before. The other half of the question is, okay, why am I ponying up my entire tuition, and yet I'm going to be sitting in my bedroom watching a professor do a lecture and possibly interacting on Zoom and occasionally teetering up to the campus to meet with somebody behind a mask and a plexiglass barrier and gloves and a hazmat suit, and this is going to be my professor. So why am I paying up this enormous sum of money to do that?
So I think the premise is one that we have to start with, whether or not it reflects the reality. I think that that is in a way a caricature of the experience that the students would have. I think that all my colleagues are out now trying to look for the best educational experience for our students, even in the midst of this, right? And so we don't look at this as just putting something online. In fact, we're trying as hard as we can because the value of the in-person interaction is important. And that will continue to be part of it. We may not necessarily be, kind of in the same physical space, but the work that we're going to do is not just putting things online and have students just become, robots sitting in front of a screen. So there's a lot of thought going into how do we ensure that in the midst of this crisis, our students are still able to have the best educational experience that is not reduced to just sitting in front of a screen. So when we talk about remote offerings, because we're very clear that, we offer there'll be remote offerings, but they're not exclusively online because you can create communities that are not necessarily just sitting in a lecture room doing stuff, right? People are engaging in different spaces. So we're looking for opportunities for students to engage. We want to make sure that the out of class experience, so what you generally call the broader student experience is there to the extent that we're able to do it and in line with the prescriptions of health authorities and so on. So we want to have some presence on campus to the extent that is possible. And we are working, just like the city announced recently, to stagger things and to move things around so that people have a chance to still engage. And what we're hearing from our students, is they yearn for that opportunity to connect, to be together. So the classroom experience is going to be partly, remote, but we're trying to make sure that the elements of the learning experience, because the learning experience is not just occur in that lecture, right? There are other ways in which you can do that. You and I sit in front of Zoom all day, you know what it's like. And so to be engaged intellectually in that space is probably not the most productive thing.
Yeah.
And we have a history on our campus and across the university being at the forefront of some of these technological innovations. And my colleagues are working hard to make sure that that student is still able to get the high quality educational experience that they deserve. Remember that we also take pride in our reputation as a world-class university. And so we have a responsibility to maintain that standing, right? And so we are doing everything we can to make sure that the times might be different, the context might be different, but the quality that we are known for will continue to define who we are.
Well, I think U of T is number 22 in the world, and among public institutions, it's number 11 in the world.
We're actually in the top 10 in publics, right? And so,
oh, really? Okay.
So you're right. So that is the kind of institution we are, and we're not going to, play it cheap. We're going to make sure that we put all our resources into play to ensure that our students get the best educational experience, even though it might look different from the traditional experience that others have.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see whether your sales pitch is really going to work. I imagine you'll know fairly shortly as to whether people are, whether the kids are, or their parents for that matter, are writing checks to do the enrollment.
Yeah.
I for one absolutely buy your arguments that we are sitting on a national treasure, and it's right underneath our noses. And I don't know that we actually in East Scarborough appreciate what a great value UTSC is to the broader community. So I think it's just terrific that
I look at this, John, as a sales pitch, because I think that we have an accountability to our community. We feel very strongly about our place in the community and what our responsibilities are. And if we're able to get our students from our community to come to UTSC, these are going to be the future leaders of our communities, right? And these are going to be the folks who change our communities for the better. And so we're invested in this place. We're an institution that is place-based, that's going to be here for a long time. We owe it to ourselves to make sure that we have a hand in giving opportunities to the next generation of folks in our community. So we take this, not just as a transactional arrangement, but something that is really value-based in terms of our commitment to our communities here.
Before I let you go, and I am going to let you go, share with our listeners the experience you and I had about a week ago in the gymnasium with Global Medic, and because it speaks, I think, brilliantly to the way UTSC interacts with the community and reaches out to the wider community.
Exactly, and so thanks for bringing it up. So when I talk about this, hopefully people understand I wasn't making it up, right? that we try to live our values every day, and we work with our municipal leaders, local leaders with Global Medic to put together what we call collaboration and response to everyone in Scarborough, which is the CARES program. And what we're trying to do there is, community coming together with university to say, what are some of the biting needs in our society as we go through these challenging times? And what can we as an institution offer in support of initiatives that would lessen the burden on our communities. What we're doing with that program is to get food out to people in our community who need it. We know that food security is an issue in our community. The community has been there to support our students with food banks. We want to give in return. We do that in different ways, and this is just one of the ways that we do that. We see ourselves as an anchor institution, which means that we have an obligation to our communities, and we work in a reciprocal fashion with the community, because our place here is made better when we have a community that is supportive, and we need to give back to that community in a fashion that is mutually beneficial. And I think when we work together, we strengthen our communities, we create a kind of resilience that makes us better, and we're able to cultivate the kind of leaders that we need for tomorrow that I talked about, because our students are engaged in this work. They're volunteering, our staff are volunteering, and it's a learning experience for them as well, right? So again, my point earlier on about it's not just the classroom, learning happens in these spaces. And when we want to cultivate that leader with a conscience and a heart, what a better way to do it than through an initiative like CARES.
Yeah, just to describe the scene to people who are not there, the UTSC, under the direction of Wisdom, had set aside, I guess it's the gymnasium, for the distribution or the packaging and repackaging of lentils. And so they'd set up the entire gymnasium with tables, volunteers, and skids of lentils, which were taken from massive bags and reduced to meal-sized portions, and then repackaged into boxes, put on skids, and distributed out through the community. And the people that were doing the volunteering, quite a number of them were from UTSC, which speaks to the very values that you were waxing eloquent about 15 minutes ago. And I think in some way speaks to why that proverbial student at Laurier and Woburn should really give a serious thought to coming to UTSC, because not only is it a excellent academic institution, not only is an outstanding community of scholars, but the values set is really very, very impressive. So speaking of very, very impressive, I think we're going to end it here. It's clear that you're named you Wisdom. I better not ask what the names of your siblings might be.
No, they all have normal ones. They all have normal ones.
I see. Well, if I were to name me, but I'm going to stay with John, which means the beloved. So between Wisdom and beloved, I think we should end it while we're ahead.
Thank you,
So,
John. And you and I share
fun.
a name too. My middle name is John. You and I share, an alma mater together too. So there's a lot that we share in common, John.
That's right. Two Queens guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My middle name is John.
So you're Wisdom, the beloved, then.
There you go.
Or you're the beloved Wisdom. Who knows?
So thank you so much for the opportunity. This has been great, and I wish all members of our community good health. Everyone stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to get together again soon.
Yeah, well, trust me, we'll follow up on this. So again, thank you, and thank you to all the people that are listening in on this. This is a great opportunity for not only the constituents of Scarborough-Guildwood, but for everyone to get to know a little bit more about UTSC, get to know a little bit more about this wonderful treasure that we have in our community. Indeed, the people that are in that institution, and I want to thank Wisdom Tettey for joining me tonight. So thanks again.
You take care.
You too as well. Be safe.